Hey everybody, Josh Peck here. Hope you're doing well. Just for a quick update, for those of you who have been following, my son is in the hospital right now with another cancer diagnosis, and I say another because he dealt with T-cell lymphoma when he was 5, and now he's 11, and he has what they're calling histiocytic sarcoma, which apparently is so rare that only 100 cases have ever been documented, I guess. Survival rate is incredibly low, but he's in the hospital for that, so your prayers would be greatly appreciated. Obviously, first and foremost, prayers for his health. Um, Also, if you want to help, because well, on top of that, before I get into that, on top of that, we had to evacuate our home due to possible mold contamination, and we're waiting to get the test results back to see if it's mold. But it was really weird when Nathan was in the hospital. Some of his symptoms subsided, but when they released him for a couple of days, and when he got back home, a lot of his symptoms started to flare up again. And so we determined that there was something in the house aggravating his symptoms. Not that mold necessarily caused it, but it was aggravating his symptoms even more. So we had to leave. We're in an Airbnb, which is why I don't have my regular background right now. And we're here until we find out what the test results are going to be. If it's not mold, there's something else in the house that's aggravating his symptoms, and we don't know what that is. If it is mold, we do rent, so that would be up to the renters or our to take care of. But that would also make us essentially homeless. So we would have to stay in an Airbnb until we could find somewhere else to live. So that, on top of all of the hospital bills, he's had to be in the hospital a lot. I think it's been a total of 3 weeks so far. And we don't know how long he's gonna have to be in there. But of course, hospital bills are racking up. And if you want to help, all of the links to all of that is in the description below. It'd be greatly appreciated. And yeah, just keep our whole family in prayer, because this is obviously one of the most difficult things that we've ever had to deal with. Save only for maybe the first time we went through this with the T cell. But now that this cancer he has now is so rare that they don't even have like an established treatment protocol. They're going to be doing chemo, and we're doing what's called integrative health, meaning we're doing other things to try to help. It's a big long story. Oh, and also, please, I know your heart's in the right place, but please, no medical advice. It just gets overwhelming. He has a very specific team for his specific blood type and his specific physiology. There's just a lot of factors, and not every treatment works for every person. Everybody, every human body is different. So I've been getting a lot of comments where people will just put one word, and they'll just put like what the treatment that they think we should do, and it's like I get it, but we're his parents, and his doctors are his doctors. Just trust us, and trust in God that God's giving us wisdom and giving the doctors wisdom. But so we're just asking for it's just too much medical advice from too many people. We know your heart's in the right place. Again, I don't mean to be ungrateful, but it is just overwhelming, and we just don't respond to them. So anyway, yeah, if you do wanna help, we have donation information in the description below, and I can also put it on the screen, which will probably be on the screen throughout this video. So that is the latest. That's everything we know right now. Things have been really crazy the past 3 weeks, and fluctuating and changing, and so we don't know what's gonna happen, but we just we trust in God first and foremost. And despite all of this, Nathan is in really good spirits. If anything, this has strengthened his faith even more, which is really great to see, especially as a father, and he's my oldest son, and it's just it's really good to see that. So yeah, just lift him up in prayer, and if you want to help, links are in the description below. All right, well, let's get into today's topic. I wanted to talk about the red heifer sacrifice in the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you're interested in learning more about this, I have a two-volume, two-book set called Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in this chapter where I talk about this, I even have an interview with Mondo Gonzalez from Prophecy Watchers, which many of you are probably familiar with. He talks a lot about the red heifer stuff, especially what's going on today, and he's been keeping up on that. So I thought, in light of all that, this would be a good topic to cover for today. Also, if you want a PDF, or if you want just the information, if you want all the show notes for this episode, there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can go to dailyrenegade.com, and you can download the PDF there, which has all the information attached to it. And the benefit of that is you get this full video at dailyrenegade.com. By the way, our website was down for about a week. It's back up now, so apologies for the inconvenience on that. But dailyrenegade.com, you can get this entire video, not just the first roughly half of it that I put up on YouTube because of censorship issues, but the whole thing. There's also a community tab where you can communicate with like-minded believers, and you can share theories. There's no censorship. You can talk about whatever you want. You can't go in there and be abusive, but it's not like Facebook. You can talk about whatever you want and not have to worry about stuff getting suppressed or deleted. So that's dailyrenegade.com, or you can go to joshpeck.substack.com, and there you'll get all this information as well, but you get it in like a blog format. If you don't want to download an extra PDF file on your computer, that might be a better option for you. Also, the benefit of the Substack is you get the audio-only podcast version of this episode, the full thing, not just the first half, like the full thing, plus every other episode that we do. I think the best thing to do is just to get them both, dailyrenegade.com and joshpeck.substack.com, and then you get the best of both worlds. The information to all that is in the description below. All right, so first let's talk about John the Apostle, who was a disciple of John the Baptist. So it turns out that some of the disciples of Jesus may have had a working knowledge of the theology that's actually taught in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one of these knowledgeable disciples may have been John the Apostle. So in the first chapter of the Gospel of John, this is John 1:35 through 42, we read, "Again the next day John was standing there with two of his disciples. Gazing at Jesus as he walked by, he said, 'Look, the Lamb of God.' When John's two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Jesus turned around and saw them following and said to them, 'What do you want?' So they said to him, 'Rabbi,' which is translated teacher, 'where are you staying?' Jesus answered, 'Come and you will see.' So they came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day. Now it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, was one of the two disciples who heard what John said and followed Jesus. He first found his own brother Simon and told him, 'We have found the Messiah,' which is translated Christ. Andrew brought Simon to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, 'You are Simon, the son of John. You will be called Cephas,' which is translated Peter." Okay, so this describes the very first disciples of Jesus Christ, but there are some other fascinating notes that we can pull out of this passage. So we read that John the Baptist himself had two disciples. Now, as I lay out in Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is evidence that that he was John the Baptist was part of, and possibly even the leader of, the Qumran community. The Qumran community were the people in Qumran who wrote and kept the Dead Sea Scrolls. So one of the, and they were called the Essenes, among other things, but one of the disciples of John the Baptist is named Andrew, and the name of the second disciple is not given. So We know so far that two of Jesus' disciples were originally disciples of John the Baptist, who was likely a member of the Qumran community. Now, as we see throughout his gospel, John the Apostle does not make a habit of referring to himself by name. He usually refers to himself as the other or the beloved disciple. So most commentators believe this unnamed disciple was John the Apostle himself. And in addition, we see another instance of the unnamed disciple later in the Gospel of John, where he's describing the events that occurred right after the arrest of Jesus. So John 18:15 through 16 says, "And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door without. Then went out that other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter." So we learn that the unnamed disciple was known to the high priest. We also learn that at first Peter had to stand outside the door to the courtyard of the high priest, but the unnamed disciple was able to go in. And then lastly, we learn that apparently the unnamed disciple had authority that Peter did not, because he was able to speak with the woman who stood guard at the door, thereby allowing her to let Peter in. So if the unnamed disciple is John the Apostle, then we learn that he had special authority and was able or was allowed into places where Peter was not allowed. So could it be that John the Apostle was given access because he held a position of authority within the Qumran community under John the Baptist, while Peter did not? Now, of course, this isn't definitive proof, as opinions vary on how to interpret this passage, but among the many proposed interpretations is the possibility that John the Apostle was a member of the Qumran community who first discipled under John the Baptist, then Jesus, and was also known to the high priest because of his authoritative standing within the leadership of the Essenes. Very interesting. Now, there's some calendar differences in the Gospel of John. So, and just for some background, many of you probably already know this, but in case you're new, the Essenes, the people who were in Qumran, they weren't only in Qumran, they were actually all throughout Israel, but the leaders of the Essenes were in Qumran. But they had a different calendar system than the rest of Israel, so there were like two calendars being used at the same time. So the Pharisees and Sadducees had their own calendar system, which was like a pagan lunar calendar system. And then the Essenes all throughout Israel had the solar calendar system, which they taught that this was the calendar that God gave to Adam. And what's really interesting is people have been able to piece that back together. And I think it was really recent. I think it was like 2018, 2019, maybe a little later. Somewhere around there, they were actually able to complete the Essene calendar, the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. And what's absolutely amazing about it is when you look at it, it is the calendar that the Bible uses from Genesis to Revelation. It's the same calendar. You can map everything out on it. In fact, we have a really cool resource if you want a calendar of your own. Me and Dr. Ken Johnson, who developed a digital version of it, we came together and put together a print version of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, and we do this every year. And it's on one side you have the Gregorian, our normal calendar, and then on the other side you have the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. So you can actually follow it in with our normal days that we use, and then you can see what corresponding day that would be on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, and makes a great gift. It's a good study tool if you want, and so the link to that is in the description below if you're interested. Also, you can go to dsscalendar.org, and there's an online version of it. But so, as most of us already know, the Gospel of John was written much differently than the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, both in style and chronology. And this is why the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are typically known as the Synoptic Gospels, while the Gospel of John stands alone. So one difference is one that we already looked at, that John the Apostle never names himself in his own Gospel, but he is named in the other three. We also looked at a brief example of how John the Apostle's writing style is similar to what's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I covered that more in depth in Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Which, by the way, if you want those books, prophecywatchers.com is the best place to get it. Now, another difference is that the Gospel of John is the only one that uses the phrase Feast of the Jews. And so, for example, John 5:1, which states in the New King James Version, after this there was the Feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So we find out that John the Apostle is differentiating the lunar calendar of the Pharisees from the solar calendar of the Qumran community. The Synoptic Gospels describe the solar calendar, while John's Gospel is referencing the lunar calendar.
Hey everyone. Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, like silver, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 today, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, it would be around $28,000 today. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. Now, you can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even your 401k into physical silver rather than having all your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is, of course, subject to hyperinflation. So go to dailyrenegade.com right now and click on the Cornerstone Asset Metals banner and sign up to get your free silver report. One of the financial experts will speak with you and find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. You can also click on the link in the description below that goes directly to cornerstoneassetmetals.com. Make sure you tell them that Josh Peck at Daily Renegade sent you. It is time to stop trusting the evil beast financial system of the world and protect your assets today.
This isn't to be mistaken as evidence that John endorsed the lunar calendar. Rather, he refers to it because the events, not the exact calendar days, but just the events of Jesus' crucifixion were determined by the events corresponding to the feasts and rituals of the Pharisees. So the lunar calendar was used widely within the Pharisaical authority of the time. So it makes sense that John would reference the lunar calendar to help explain what the Pharisees were doing and when, such as the Feast of the Jews or the Passover of the Jews. And you can look at John 2:13 and 11:55 for references to that. Now, this is something that I briefly mentioned in my 2-volume set. But this also helps explain some of those apparent discrepancies between the dates and times of events between John's Gospel and the rest, most specifically when it comes to the Passion Week of Jesus. So most assume only one calendar is in play here and that the Gospel writers simply made mistakes, but in reality John is showing a difference between two different calendars, which completely clears up the confusion. We see another example of this when John the Apostle describes the Feast of Tabernacles. So John 7:2-8 says, "Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. His brethren therefore said unto him, Depart hence and go into Judea, that thy disciples also may see the works that thou doest. For there is no man that doeth anything in secret, and he himself seeketh to be known openly. If thou do these things, show thyself to the world, for neither did his brethren believe in him. Then Jesus said unto them, My time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but me it hateth, because I testify of it, that the works thereof are evil. Go ye up unto this feast. I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come. So we see that the passage opens by describing the feast as the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles. Now, this should lead us to ask some questions. Why would John the Apostle phrase it this way? Didn't John have a Feast of Tabernacles himself? Wasn't John a Jew? Why would he decide to call it the Feast of Tabernacles and not just the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles and not just the Feast of Tabernacles in a more general sense? Well, of course, John the Apostle was a Jew and would have observed the Feast of Tabernacles, but the date of the Feast of Tabernacles would have been different depending on whether the solar calendar of the Qumran community or the lunar calendar of the Pharisees was being used. So if true, then the Pharisees would have been observing the Feast of Tabernacles on the wrong day. This might be why John refers to it as the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles rather than a more general just Feast of Tabernacles. So maybe there was more than one throughout Israel because the Pharisees celebrated it according to one calendar while the Essenes celebrated it according to another. Since most of Israel would have followed the Pharisaical lunar calendar, John the Apostle could have differentiated this by just using the description, the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles. And additionally, this could be what Jesus meant when he said, I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come. It might mean more than that it just wasn't time for Jesus to die yet, but it could mean that his appointed time would correspond with a different calendar than expected. So perhaps, according to the calendars, one of the Feast of Tabernacles had not yet come, even though it was already starting according to the other calendar. Perhaps, therefore, Jesus waited until the middle of the feast to teach at the temple, John 7:14. So we can see some other interesting things from John's Gospel relating to Passover and the Passion Week as well. Regarding the time prior to the Passover, we read in John 13:1, Now before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. Therefore, we know at this point in John's Gospel, we're at a time before Feast of Passover, and Jesus knew his hour had come. And we can compare this with the Gospel of Matthew. So Matthew 26:17-19 says, Now the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? And he said, Go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, The Master saith, My time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. So in Matthew's Gospel, we learn that this was the first day of unleavened bread, and they were preparing for Passover. When we look at the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, and again, you can find that if you have my books, I actually put a copy of it in the back of it in one of the appendix. Or you can just go to dsscalendar.org, or you can get a print version at the link in the description. But when we look at the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, we see that Passover is Nisan 14, the day before the first day of unleavened bread on Nisan 15. So what's happening here? Well, again, it only really makes sense when we understand that two different calendars are being used. The first day of unleavened bread refers to the solar calendar the Essenes would have used. The Feast of Passover, however, is relating to the Pharisees' lunar calendar. This is the Passover of the Jews that John would describe, Israel's national date of observance. Remember, the Pharisees had placed Passover on the wrong date according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, but Jews in Israel were still expected to observe it on that day. So that kind of builds some of the foundation to get into some of the red heifer stuff. And in my opinion, what I'm about to share, I think is one of the most beautiful and amazing revelations that came from studying the Essene calendar, considering the Gospels. So we find this by first looking back at John's description of Jesus' resurrection. So John 20 verse 1 says, Now very early in the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been moved away from the entrance. John is describing events that occurred the Sunday after the crucifixion, which on our Dead Sea Scroll calendar would be Nisan 19, the fifth day of unleavened bread. Um, a bit later, we read, Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" Because she thought he was the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will take him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus replied, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. Go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene came and informed the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them what Jesus had said to her. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the disciples had gathered together and locked the doors of the place because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Now that's John 20:15 through 20. So there's a few points that we need to keep in mind from these passages. So as stated, these events occur on Sunday, Nisan 19. In the morning, Mary sees Jesus. At the time, Jesus tells Mary not to touch him or cling to him in some translations, such as the ESV, because he had not yet ascended to the Father. During the evening of that same day, Jesus greets the disciples and shows them his hands and side. Notice the text does not say the disciples touched him, only that they saw him. There is no bodily contact that we're aware of anywhere in the passage during the events that occurred Sunday, Nisan 19. Now, as you might have already guessed, we do read of bodily contact a bit later. This is where things get very interesting. So the Gospel of John continues. This is John 20:26 through 28. 8 days later, the disciples were again together in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your fingers here and examine my hands. Extend your hand and put it into my side. Do not continue in your unbelief, but believe." Thomas replied to him, "My Lord and my God." So on Sunday, Nisan 19, Jesus told Mary not to touch him. And as far as we know, he did not invite or allow the disciples to touch him either. 8 days later, however, Jesus personally invited Thomas to touch his hands and his side. So what's the significance? What happened during those 8 days? Well, if we look at the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, we can see that Sunday, Nisan 26, is 8 days after Sunday, Nisan 19. And we get this by counting Nisan 19 inclusively, meaning Nisan 19 is day 1, Nisan 20 is day 2, etc. We also see that the following Sunday, Nisan 26, is first fruits of barley. On Nisan 19, Jesus cannot be touched because he has not yet ascended to the Father. On Nisan 26, first fruits of barley, Jesus can be touched, which must mean he has already ascended to the Father. But we know Jesus' final ascension has not yet taken place because he's still present with the disciples. So could it be that there were actually 2 ascensions of Jesus? Chapter 19 of the book of Numbers explains the purification laws for the red heifer sacrifice. And I know that seems like a weird jump. It seems like that doesn't have anything to do with anything, but believe me, it does. So here's the description of a sin offering. This is Numbers 19, 8 through 10. It says, "The one who burns it must wash his clothes in water and bathe himself in water. He will be ceremonially unclean until evening. When a man who is ceremonially clean must gather up the ashes of the red heifer then a man who is ceremonially clean must gather up the ashes of the red heifer and put them in a ceremonially clean place outside the camp. They must be kept for the community of the Israelites for use in the water of purification. It is a purification for sin. The one who gathers the ashes of the heifer must wash his clothes and be ceremonially unclean until evening. This will be a permanent ordinance both for the Israelites and the resident foreigner who lives among them." Now, the book of Hebrews gives us a connection to Jesus and the sin offering as described in Numbers. So Hebrews 13, 11 through 12 says, "For the bodies of those animals whose blood the high priest brings into the sanctuary as an offering for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, to sanctify the people by his own blood, Jesus also suffered outside the camp." Very interesting. Now we know the book of Hebrews is specifically referencing the sin offering from Numbers 19 because ordinary sacrifices were slaughtered at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and we get that from Leviticus 17:5. The red heifer was to be slaughtered outside of the camp, Numbers 19:3.
I've talked about it many times before, but the ancient Jewish group called the Essenes, who were around at the time of Christ, said that they were the ones who kept the original prophetic calendar God gave to Adam. Did you know that calendar has actually been reproduced today from the fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls? That's right, and now you can own one for yourself. So the Dead Sea Scroll wall calendar is now available and contains both the Essenes calendar as well as our own calendar, so you can compare the dates and see if they fall on anything interesting or prophetic in this amazing and ancient calendar. The calendar itself was developed by Dr. Ken Johnson and put into print by yours truly, so proceeds from the sales of this calendar go to support both Dr. Ken Johnson's ministry as well as Daily Renegade. It's amazing because this is the exact calendar that the Bible itself uses from Genesis all the way to Revelation. It's a great study tool and can even make a great gift for your prophecy-loving friends and family members. Click on the link in the description below to pick up yours today.
So if we follow the author's example in Hebrews and equate Jesus with the red heifer, it begins to make sense what was going on during that first Sunday of Jesus' resurrection. So from Numbers, we read that the one who burns the heifer and the clean one who gathers the ashes will be unclean until that evening. Therefore, this ritual renders the one conducting it unclean, and this is important and will be addressed later. Jesus himself could fulfill both roles. He gave his own life, John 10:18. He was certainly clean since he had no sin in him, yet he became sin for us, 2 Corinthians 5:21. And after his sacrificial death, he would have been taking the so-called ashes of the heifer to, quote, deposit them outside the camp in a clean place, end quote. So what are the ashes and where is that clean place? Well, we know that Jesus wasn't literally burned. He was crucified. And this is likely because the ashes were needed for anyone who had touched a dead body to become ritually pure. Since no one touched Jesus after his death or before his ascension to the Father, the ashes would not be needed. That's a good thing because no ashes would have been available since Jesus was not burned. So this brings into clearer focus why Jesus tells Mary not to touch him. Now, while Jesus wasn't physically burned, there is still something we can learn about the manner of his sacrifice. Fire can represent purification. We learn about that in Malachi 3:2, which is why the red heifer was burned. A resurrection would definitely be a purification of a once dead physical body. Scripture even compares the trials we go through as believers to fire that comes to refine us, then equates that with Jesus' suffering on the cross, and that's in 1 Peter 4:12. Most likely, the ashes are the body of Christ, and the clean place is in heaven with the Father. This is likely why he waited until the evening to come to the disciples. He was following the statute from the book of Numbers. Also, we see the ashes are kept in a clean place for use in the water of purification, which is the cleansing water for the sin offering that is explained in the next passage that we'll look at. And it's also interesting that the end of verse 10 says that this shall be a perpetual statute for the people of Israel and for the stranger who sojourns among them. Meaning this applies to both Jew and Gentile, just like the sacrifice of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now from Numbers explaining the water, we read, this is Numbers 19:11 through 13. Whoever touches the corpse of any person will be ceremonially unclean 7 days. He must purify himself with water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and so will be cleaned. If he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and the 7th day, then he will not be clean. Anyone who touches the corpse of any dead person and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord. And that person must be cut off from Israel because the water of purification was not sprinkled on him. He will be unclean. His uncleanness remains on him. Now we know why Mary and the disciples could not touch Jesus. We also now know what he was doing during the week before the 8th day. Right after his resurrection and after Mary saw him, because he said that he had not yet ascended to the Father, Jesus must have ascended to heaven in his previously dead but now resurrected body, which would be analogous to the ashes of the red heifer, to make the water for the impurity. He could not come back into the camp, but had to stay outside the camp until he was clean in order to return. He then came back to the earth that evening. At this time, he would be considered clean in terms of the passage in Numbers describing the water of impurity in order to return to the camp. But he still needed to be cleansed in the water before he could be touched in accordance with Numbers 19:11 through 13. Now, this isn't because he literally touched somebody else's dead body. Rather, he took sin and death upon himself on the cross and became a dead body. Now, after he saw the disciples, Jesus must have ascended to heaven again to cleanse himself on the third and seventh days with the water he made, completing the sin offering as described in Numbers 19:12. So this whole process is described in detail from Numbers 19:14 through 19. Which says, "This is the law: when a man dies in a tent, anyone who comes into the tent and all who are in the tent will be ceremonially unclean 7 days. And every open container that has no covering fastened on it is unclean, and whoever touches the body of someone killed with a sword in the open fields, or the body of someone who died of natural causes, or a human bone, or a grave, will be unclean 7 days. For a ceremonially unclean person, you must take some of the ashes of the heifer burnt for purification from sin and pour fresh running water over them in a vessel. Then a ceremonial clean person must take hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle it on the tent, on all its furnishings, and on the people who were there, or on the one who touched a bone, or one who was killed, or one who died, or a grave. And the clean person must sprinkle the unclean on the third day, and on the seventh day. And on the seventh day he must purify him, and then he must wash his clothes and bathe in water, and he will be clean in the evening." Again, that's Numbers 19:14 through 19. So this is what Jesus would have been doing in heaven. And it's also interesting to note that Numbers 19:14 through 19 says when someone dies in a tent. One could certainly say Jesus died in a tent, considering that Paul describes the human body as a tent in Scripture, 2 Corinthians 5:1. But this is what he would have been doing in heaven. So from Numbers, we are to understand the third and the seventh day of cleansing as the actual third and seventh days of the week, according to the Essene calendar. So we begin our count on Sunday, Nisan 19, as our day one. Then we would have the third day of cleansing on Tuesday, which is literally the third day of the week, which is also the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Nisan 21. The seventh day would be the following Sabbath, literally the seventh day of the week, Saturday, Nisan 25. And this would mean the eighth day, when Jesus met the disciples again, would have been on Nisan 26, first fruits of barley. So this is probably why Paul refers to Jesus as the first fruits of the dead in 1 Corinthians 15:20 through 22, which says, "But now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also came through a man. For just as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive." Now, amazingly, as if that wasn't enough, the last day of unleavened bread, Tuesday, Nisan 21, is considered a high Sabbath because it is the seventh day of the festival, meaning that this is a week where there are two Sabbaths, one on the third day, Tuesday, and one on the seventh day, Saturday. We have two Sabbaths of cleansing lining up after Jesus' resurrection and Jesus returning to the disciples on the first fruits of barley, which points back to his resurrection elsewhere in Scripture. This is clearly too much to be just a coincidence. This is why the disciples didn't see Jesus again until 8 days after that first Sunday. He needed a full 7 days to complete the cleansing ritual for the sin offering. Now, let's talk about Qumran and the red heifer. So the Qumran community apparently had a high regard for the red heifer sacrifice, as it is written about quite extensively in 4QMMT, which is also called the Halakhic letter. In fact, the writer even interprets for us all the places described in Leviticus so we don't have to guess. This was written before the time of Christ, so the writer couldn't have known the importance that this sacrifice would play. However, the writer does seem to at least realize there is some significance beyond just the sacrifice himself. The writer of 4Q MMT explains, quote, "And concerning what is written, Leviticus 17:3, when a man slaughters within the camp, they slaughter outside the camp a bull or a sheep or a she-goat. The place of slaughter is to the north of the camp, and we think that the temple is the place of the tent of meeting, and Jerusalem is the camp, and outside the camp is outside Jerusalem. It is the camp of their cities. Outside the camp you shall remove the ashes from the altar and burn there the sin offering, for Jerusalem is the place which he chose from among all the tribes of Israel." So that's Halakhic letter 30b through 36. So according to the writer, the temple was the tent of meeting, Jerusalem is the camp, and outside the camp is outside Jerusalem. That's important because this is exactly how the crucifixion of Jesus was carried out and how these definitions connect it to the red heifer sacrifice. It can help us know that we're on the right track if the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls agree with our definitions and interpretations. Let me see how much time we have here. Okay. Now, the Talmud, specifically a Mishnah called Para, written around AD 200, describes the ritual of the red heifer. It even details how many times this sacrifice has been made in the past and by whom. So Mishnah Para 3:5 says, "And who prepared these? Moses prepared the first, Ezra prepared the second, and 5 were prepared from the time of Ezra, the words of Rabbi Meir. But the sages say 7 from the time of Ezra, and who prepared them? Shimon the just and Yohanan the high priest prepared 2, Elihonai the son of Hakkoth and Hanamel the Egyptian, and Ishmael the son of Yabi prepared each one." So, according to Rabbi Meir, this was done by 7 individuals, making Jesus the 8th, and the sages said it occurred 9 times, making Jesus' sacrifice the 10th. The sages offered 5 names, 2 of whom performed the sacrifice twice, bringing the total number to 9. Therefore, if this is accurate, the sacrifice was performed 9 times by 7 people prior to Jesus, and this means Jesus would have been the 8th person to complete the sacrifice for the 10th time. You have it like this. Moses was the first to do the sacrifice. Ezra was the second. Shimon was the third, but he did it twice. So he was the third individual, but he did it the 3rd and 4th times that this sacrifice was done. Yohanan was the 4th, but he did it the 5th and 6th times because he did it twice as well. That makes Elihonai the 5th individual who did the 7th sacrifice. Hanamel was the 6th who did the 8th. Ishmael was the 7th who did the 9th. And then finally culminating in Jesus, who would be the 8th individual, when this would have been the 10th time it was done. So this is interesting because according to biblical scholar and theologian E.W. Bullinger, 8 is the number of new beginnings or the start of a new series. So he wrote, "Hence it is the number especially associated with resurrection and regeneration and the beginning of a new era or order." The number 10 signifies divine perfection and the start of a new series of numbers. So he wrote, it has been already pointed out that 10 is one of the perfect numbers. It signifies the perfection of divine order commencing as it does an altogether new series of numbers. Completeness of order, making the entire round of anything, is therefore the ever-present signification of the number 10. It implies that nothing is wanting, that the number and order are perfect, that the whole cycle is complete. Very interesting. So Altogether, we have a new beginning and divine perfection. According to this, we can see how the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus would have fulfilled both meanings in the new covenant. Jesus fulfills the divine perfection, and the new covenant with the church fulfills the new beginning. Now, another astounding note from ancient Jewish commentary is the fact that rabbis were completely baffled by the red heifer sacrifice. They couldn't make sense of why God would ordain a ritual that would render the person performing it unclean. So this is from Badadbar Rabbah 19:8, and it says, "A Gentile asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, 'These rituals you do, they seem like witchcraft. You bring a heifer, burn it, crush it up, and take its ashes. If one of you is impure by the dead, the highest type of impurity, 2 or 3 drops are sprinkled on him, and you declare him pure?' After he left, our rabbi's students said, 'You pushed him off with a reed. What will you say to us?' He said to them, 'By your lives, a dead person does not make things impure, and the water does not make things pure.'" So they actually concluded that it has no real purpose, but still must be observed because God commanded it. So in Badadbar Rabbah 19:8, continuing, it says, "Rather, God said, I have engraved a rule, I have decreed a decree, and you have no permission to transgress what I decreed, as it says, this is a chalk or a rule of the Torah." So it's remarkable that the rabbis throughout time could see the uniqueness of this sacrifice, but would not accept that it was a picture of what the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, had accomplished. And, as we touched on earlier, this helps us understand what the writer of Hebrews is describing by relating the blood of Christ to that of bulls, goats, and the ashes of the heifer. So Hebrews 9:12 through 14 says, "Neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. For if the blood of bulls and of goats and the ashes of an heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifieth to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God." So the blood of Christ is far better than even the ashes of the red heifer, because rather than needing to be performed multiple times, depending on the situations that come up, the sacrifice of Jesus is once and for all. Okay, we got more to talk about. I want to talk about some challenges to this red heifer connection. We're also going to talk about John the Apostle and the community rule. And there's some really interesting stuff there. And then we're gonna conclude talking about Jesus and the Essenes.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the first half of this episode of the Sharpening Report. If you are a Bible-believing Christian who opposes the kingdom of darkness trying to run the world right now, then you are a renegade to the satanic system. We here at Daily Renegade wear that badge proudly. So, if you're a renegade as well, and you want to see the rest of this video, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now and get a membership today. Not only will you get the rest of this video, but you'll get our full catalog of Sharpening Report episodes and Daily Renegade update videos on topics such as Bible prophecy, science, technology, the Nephilim, aliens, and so much more. All of our episodes at Daily Renegade are early access, so as a member, you'll get the videos before anyone else does. Daily Renegade also offers videos not available anywhere else due to social media censorship. We also have a community page only for members where we can all fellowship together without fear of censorship. It's basically the best of Facebook and YouTube rolled into one without any of the garbage. Memberships are only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can do it, I suggest getting the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run, and essentially you get 2 months for free that way. So come join our family of renegades at dailyrenegade.com right now. The link is in the description below, and we'll see you there.